you've had an extraordinary run of taking on tough topics like this and taking on influential businesses, influential people. If you were going to advise reporters today on covering Trump, what's the advice?
Well, I mean, Trump changes the whole nature of the game, in my opinion. I mean, and I think it's clear that he not only won the election because of it, but he discovered something. He discovered that most people in the audience think that reality TV is reality. So that, and that, in a sense, outflanked everybody. The facts didn't matter. He said it himself. He said, if I shot somebody at noon, right, in Manhattan, you know, my supporters would still be there. And it's not clear whether what we would call rational argument over facts or information would make much difference with his supporters. You know, obviously we've all seen it. Just this morning, I just looked, I went back and looked at the Saturday Night Live thing, you know, with Spicer and so on. I mean, so I don't really have much advice other than to do the stories that you feel should be done and try to do them. Try to do the best job you can. Don't worry about him so much. Actually, my seminar at Berkeley right now, we are focused sort of on him. We're focused on him in Russia. Just sort of bringing, because students don't remember that there was a Cold War, you know, they don't understand. So I'm bringing in retired FBI people and other people to explain what this sort of means and where Putin comes from, and, you know, so on, to get some background for what it means that the President of the United States is making nice to Russia. But I think we're in a really difficult moment. I don't think anybody has a clear idea of where we're going to come out.
You know, you mentioned the FBI, and one of the things that is sort of a sidelight here is your relationship with the FBI, including on the Unabomber story and so forth. What's the secret? I mean, here you were an old line radical.
I don't know, and actually, I was a subject of FBI investigations before I ever met an FBI agent. And you know, I do have a file that I got back in Freedom of Information back in '75. There's some updates. Actually, I just found the other day my update from the New York Times days when we did the story about the tunnel under the Russian embassy.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right. Okay, so they opened a leak investigation. How did we find out about that? It's not just the FBI, it's that one of the reasons I got into journalism, stayed in journalism, is that in 1970, unsolicited, other than from stories we were doing in a weekly newspaper in San Diego, two law enforcement people knocked on our door. They were in suits. I could tell that through the curtain on the door. I thought it was the FBI. They had fedoras on. But when I opened the door, they had striped ties. And in those days, J. Edgar Hoover didn't let FBI agents famously wear striped ties. They had to wear solid ties. So I knew they weren't FBI agents. And these guys actually turned out to be from what we now call the criminal division of the IRS. And they weren't after us. They were reading our newspaper. And because of the stories we were doing about what I would call the local oligarchs in town at the time. And so I wound up with a new category, which is called honest cops. And it sort of changed my view of law enforcement, which wasn't exactly friendly to, for a variety of reasons. And from there, as a journalist, I think the key for me to stay in the business was that everyone's a person. That you really have, that's what I tell my students, you gotta think of you gotta calm yourself down if you're like an advocate. In Berkeley, we have a lot of advocates. And take a deep breath and realize that everyone's a person, everyone does put yourself in their shoes, and that will help you develop sources, and I think it'll make you a better reporter.
Let me ask one more, then we'll take a question. After the movie came out, did you hear from people who saw the movie?
Sure.
And
yeah,
and were you
like Don and Mike? You mean?
Yeah, were those bridges permanently burned?
Hewitt finally surrendered right after 9/11, he made a public speech denouncing me as a wannabe investigative reporter in 2000, and then realized he'd made a big mistake, and then, as I heard through the grapevine, and then right after 9/11, when I was working at the Times, you know, I guess was reading what I was doing, and so called up and said, "I surrender." Right? He never said another word about it. Mike and I met about 2 years after that, and had a conversation or two, but I think he, to him, as he kept modifying what his perspective was on it, but the bottom line was, it was a bad moment for him.
In terms of making the decisions, or?
Right, in terms of, basically what he said to me at the time, I had gone over to BlackRock myself. I'd been summoned over 2 days before this meeting with the General Counsel to talk to the regular First Amendment lawyers. They summoned me over there. I was on my way to London to try to find corroboration, or not lack of corroboration, from British American Tobacco former executives who I tracked down. And I was stopped, and I was told, "Come to BlackRock." And I went over there and found out that there was this thing called tortious interference, and there was going to be a big meeting, and they were reviewing everything. And as I said to these lawyers, "You know everything. I didn't do anything on this story without sending a memo to the lawyers." I mean, my theory was, for survival in network news, was that you had to, in a sense, dirty everybody up above you. Because when the shit hits the fan, everybody runs the other way, right? I didn't have anything to do with this. I don't want to ruin my weekend. I'm not part of that. I don't know anything about it. Who is that guy? You know, that's what happens when you get in trouble. So I purposely papered to the law department all the way through. And I came back from the meeting, and Wallace had heard I was over there, and he was calling me over there and saying, "What are you doing there?" I said, I'll come back. I show up, we have this meeting in his office, I tell him what they're talking about, and they were gonna have this big meeting that's coming. And he said to me, "I could go out like Edward R. Murrow, but I'm not gonna." You know?
Go down in flames.
He was not going to, more or less say what, like, "I'm not gonna wander in the wilderness of National Public Radio" is a real line. And it's a reference to Daniel Shore, I don't know if you remember Daniel Shore, who was fired by CBS for leaking documents to the Pike Committee back in the 70s, and the CIA investigation by the House Committee, and wound up nowhere for a while, and then finally got on the radio, and then became a huge success on National Public Radio. But that was his version of, he wasn't going that way. So that meant I was on my own.
Could you have stayed?
If we didn't make the movie, I could. If I made the movie and lied to the filmmakers about what happened, yes.
Okay.
I could have, but I had decided that I didn't trust them. There were certain things that happened in the course of this. I mean, some of it's dramatized. You see Hewitt with this guy, John Scanlon, who works for the industry, right? Well, I found out not only that Scanlon had been in the office, not only that they had gone over and talked to him without ever telling me, but that, they were all buddies, right? And that was, I don't know how, it's hard to think of like working with people on difficult stories if you're not going to be able to be honest about what you're up to.
All right, questions? Yes, please.